Steve Hill, and he's a journalist, formerly with LaborNet. It was on the staff of
That's right.
LaborNet, the first employee of LaborNet, actually. So, Steve,
That's right.
why don't you introduce yourself and then give your presentation?
Sure. Stephen Hill. I'm the author of a book called Raw Deal: How the Uber Economy and Runaway Capitalism Are Screwing American Workers. And in that book, I look at not only at Uber, but also Airbnb, the impact of what's being called the digital economy, its impact on jobs, the labor force, and just our future in general. Artificial intelligence, robots, automation. I mean, these are all the things that are going to dramatically affect how we work and the future of work. And so I also just wrote a book that came out in Germany, in German, called The Startup Illusion, the illusion of startup companies, and the idea that somehow these startup companies are all going to save us. The Silicon Valley happy talk that we hear so much. There's a lot of belief in that in Germany. So I wrote a book basically saying, hey, wait a minute. I come from Silicon Valley, and it's not all that that the Silicon Valley wants you to believe. There's a lot of downsides to the Silicon Valley Wall Street model of capitalist development. So I'm happy to be here at LaborTech. Since how many of these did we organize, Steve?
Well, we started in
labor conferences.
1989, and it becomes more relevant every year with the whole development of technology and how it's affecting working people. So why don't you talk about what is happening?
You were on the cutting edge, Steve. You were way ahead of the curve.
That was before the web, but email was a revolution at that time. As far as internationalism, building worker solidarity globally, and communication, that's an opposite side of the negative effects it has. So, Steve, why don't you talk about what's happening in Uber technology and the future of it, and what this means to working people around the world?
Well, to understand what's happening with this, you have to understand that the overall context is the 2008-2009 economic collapse. The capitalist economy collapsed around the world, and in that collapse, we lost a lot of what was called the good jobs, the jobs that had health care and benefits and had a certain amount of job security, decent wages. And a lot of those are middle-class jobs. And the jobs that are being created now in this so-called recovery are, part-time, temporary, low-income, low-security jobs. And so that's happening throughout their traditional economy as well. Auto companies. I mean, you go to an auto company today, and a lot of those workers working in the auto plants are temp workers. They even have a term for them, permatemps, because they keep them on a temporary basis because it allows them to hold a sword over their heads, and they keep them as temp workers for years. And so now along comes this digital economy, and Uber, Lyft, Airbnb saying, hey, we'll offer you jobs, and then these jobs are jobs as independent contractors. As an independent contractor, you don't have any job security. They can cut you off the platform at any time for any reason. You don't have any health care. You don't have any safety net. All you have is the wage. You don't even have injured worker compensation, unemployment compensation. Many of these drivers who have been injured on the job, they're not covered. They have to take care of their own medical expenses, and if they have to miss work because they're injured, then they have to pay for that out of their own pocket as well. So these are not good jobs. These are types of jobs that you have. In San Francisco, you have drivers coming over from Fresno, driving a long ways, and they sleep in their cars just so they can drive in San Francisco. They don't know the streets. They block the bicycle lanes. They, double park all the time, just doing anything they can to survive. And so this is kind of, Uber's just one of these companies. There are other companies, another one in the Bay Area called Upwork. Upwork is a platform where you have about 10 million freelancers on Upwork. And these are people that do things anywhere from computer programming, graphic design, software engineers. There's translators on there. There's even architects, lawyers, a huge number of occupations on Upwork. and basically it's a global workforce. And so you have workers from the United States who are competing, and they actually bid online for jobs. They're competing against workers in Thailand, India, Philippines, all these places. So you see this kind of race to the bottom where, workers in these developing world are competing on the same jobs for workers in the first world. And I mean, it used to be in order to access workers for your company in, say, India, you had to start a company or a plant, or you had to have a physical presence in India. You don't have to do that anymore. You can outsource by just simply going online on a place like Upwork, and you can hire someone from India. So, I mean, this is in some ways a great opportunity for these workers from India, Thailand, and Philippines. They have access to markets now that they didn't have before. But for workers here in the United States, in Germany, in the developed world, it's a huge, huge challenge because, again, these workers don't have any health care. They don't have any safety net benefits. They don't have any labor laws really that cover them. The companies that hire them don't have to pay into the social security system of the countries where they're being hired from. There's all sorts of ramifications for using these kind of online labor brokerages to hire people, and this is going to be a huge impact going forward.
And how are workers organizing? It seems like capital has freedom of market. Trump wants to renegotiate NAFTA now to make it more like TPP. It seems that both political parties have gone along with it. In San Francisco, you have, as a result of Uber and Lyft, these companies, you have thousands of cars on the road, environmental problems, which we're going to get into later on the conference, but there's a whole deregulation of the environment, which is causing real dangerous situations. What is the solution to this crisis? And the power now of these media monopolies, technology monopolies in automation and AI, which they're going to use to further profit themselves.
Well, you see a different reaction in different countries. So in the United States, we're such a naive. We're so naive about technology. We tend to be very pro-technology, and anything that's technology is good. And so as a result, we end up, just looking at this, and thinking like, well, what is this? Is this just like in terms of Uber? Is this a taxi company? Uber says no. We're a technology company. We're not a transportation company. In fact, Uber changed its name from Uber to Uber Technologies just so it could make this case that it's actually a technology company. But in Europe, for example, they don't buy it. They look at Uber and they say, sorry, maybe you have an app now and you have a new way of getting people this service, but you're still providing the same basic service of transport for hire. And so you are a transportation company. You are not a technology company. You must follow the laws for taxis in Germany or France or wherever. And so in the United States, we've let these companies get away with not following local laws. And in some cases, in California, Jerry Brown made a huge mistake by passing a state law to regulate Uber, for example, and taking away the ability of the local government to regulate this company. So, for example, in San Francisco, there are now 1,800 taxi cabs, approximately. There are 45,000 Uber and Lyft drivers. And at any one time, estimates are that 7,000 to 8,000 of those drivers are on the road. So, the streets have been swamped. That's why you're seeing all this congestion. It's undermining public transportation because studies have shown that instead of using public transportation or walking or bicycling, people are taking Uber. Even, they spent billions of dollars in San Francisco to complete the BART connection out to the airport. And now the studies have found that fewer people are using BART to the airport because they're using Uber and Lyft. They're using Uber and Lyft because the price is so cheap. Why is the price cheap? Well, we now know that Uber is subsidizing about 50% of the cost of that ride. When you get into Uber, you're only paying about 50% of that ride. The other 50% is being paid by the venture capitalists that are subsidizing that ride and subsidizing Uber. And so, to understand what's going on here, you have this monopoly-seeking company subsidizing your ride to undermine not only the competitors, but at this point, its biggest competitor is public transportation. So you go to a place like Berlin, you have a public transportation system that works. You get on, you can take their subway system, the bus system. They come every few minutes. You don't have to wait. It's good quality transportation anywhere you want to go in the city. A place like San Francisco, the bus may show up 25 minutes, and you sit there waiting. There's no schedule in San Francisco still to this day, which is mind-boggling to me. And instead, people are using Uber and Lyft because they think this is the best option, because the app, you hit your app, it shows up in 10 minutes. Well, now you're sitting in the car 20, 25 minutes longer to get anywhere. So, in the U.S., we're not coping with this well. I think there's a way to integrate these sorts of services and new technologies into the U.S. economy, but the way we're doing it is just making things far worse. It's undermining public transportation. So there's lots of things we can do about this, and the labor issues as well. I think we have to start looking at creating things like portable safety nets. So when an Uber driver drives, or someone works for Upwork, or they work for Airbnb as renting out their home, they should qualify still for safety net benefits. You create what's called a portable safety net. So every worker who's hired by a company, regardless of that worker is part-time, full-time, temporary, independent contractor, doesn't matter. Those workers would have what's called an individual security account set up for that worker, and every business that hires that worker would pay a certain amount of money above the wage that would be prorated to the number of hours that worker works for that business. And that way, that business would still be paying for that worker's safety net. In the United States, you actually, as an employer, have an incentive to hire independent contractors instead of regularly employed people. Because if you hire an independent contractor, you're paying 30% less in labor costs compared to a competitor who's hiring, a regularly employed full-time worker. Because you're not paying for health care, injured worker, unemployment compensation. You're not paying for paid sick leave. You're not paying for paid holidays. You're not paying for any of that. And so there's an incentive. If you and I are in business against each other, and you're hiring full-time workers and I'm hiring contractors, my labor costs are 30% more or less. So that puts pressure on you to hire contractors as well. So if you create a portable safety net, so even for me, in this example that we're talking about here, if I'm hiring contractors, I still have to pay into this individual security account for these workers' safety net. That takes away the incentive that I have to hire these sorts of workers to begin with. So maybe instead of hiring 3 part-time contractors to do a job, I might think maybe I'll just hire 1 full-time worker to do the same job. And so we have to really change the incentives in the capitalist economy that right now are screwing workers so badly. And this portable safety net idea for all workers, not just digital workers, not just contractors, but all workers should be able to, because there's a lot of regularly employed part-time workers out there where the employer says, oh, look, if you get to 30 hours a week, I'll give you full benefits. Well, then they just make sure you never get to 30 hours a week. You get to 29 hours a week. They do this game all the time. So by having a portable safety net that's universal, covering all workers, we would change the incentives in the economy overnight and make this happen. And the final thing I'll add on that point, we don't have to wait for this dysfunctional Washington, D.C. and Congress to do this. You could enact something like this at the local level or at the state level. So San Francisco, Seattle, New York City, where you have Democratic city councilors that supposedly are saying, hey, we're not Donald Trump, right? We're more progressive. We're more for the people. Well, let's see if they really are. Let's propose portable safety nets at the local level in San Francisco and see if we can get the votes to do it.
And also, you've talked about the bubble of these companies like Uber, that there are a lot of speculators are involved in, and you're not buying any Uber stock apparently for a concern about really the future of this whole pyramid that's been developed. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm shorting Uber. A guy I went to school with, he became a big short seller, and he was one of the first to short Enron. He made a ton of money shorting Enron. And so, sometimes it happens that these companies look like they're the 800-pound gorilla, and you look under the hood, you look at their books, and you discover, wow, this company is actually kind of a weakling, and we didn't even realize it. So in the case of Uber, they lost almost $3 billion last year. This year, the first quarter of 2017, they have lost $700 million. So they're on track to lose another almost $3 billion. They lost, about $1 to $2 billion in China. They had these dreams of a global empire, and it collapsed in China because they didn't understand the Chinese culture and the Chinese way of doing business, and they just blew a ton of money there. They're blowing a ton of money in India. A local competitor there is out competing them. And they're trying hard to get into Europe, but as I mentioned earlier, Europe just isn't buying this business that we're a technology company, not a transportation company. And they, most European countries and now the European Commission is about to do a ruling on Uber in which they're going to, looks like, tell them, sorry, you're a transportation company, you must follow taxi laws in all these different countries. And so Uber really is slowly, they're not doing much business outside of the United States. It's not working well for them. And then when you look at the United States, you see, well, this is why they're losing almost $3 billion, because they are subsidizing every ride, as I mentioned earlier. They're paying 50% of the cost of every ride. So, I mean, the ironic thing is the more people use Uber, the further into debt Uber goes. That is not a business model that is going to work. And so, the recent CEO of recent resignation of CEO Travis Kalanick, a lot of people say it was because of all the scandals and, charges of sexual harassment, stealing trade secrets on self-driving cars from Google, on and on and on. The parade of horribles that has been Uber for many, many years. But, Uber had money scandals before the recent round, and it was fine because everyone thought this company is the 800-pound gorilla. They're growing, their revenue sources over the charts, on and on and on. What really pushed Travis Kalanick out was the main investors in this company realizing, holy moly, this company is not making any money. That's the big problem here. If this company was making billions already, those scandals would have been brushed under the carpet, just like all the other scandals were before this recent last round of scandals. I reported on the Uber scandals in my book, Raw Deal. I mean, the lack of insurance, a lack of adequate background checks, charges of rape and everything else going on by drivers. I mean, there was already a ton of scandals. They were charged with spying, using their tracking technology to spy on journalists, to spy on certain customers. They've been doing this kind of stuff. They had their technology for tracking. Internally they had names for it like God View, and within their own company they called it Creepy Stalker View. And so this is the type of company we've been dealing with now for quite a few years. And it's only recently that the CEO was pushed out. But it wasn't because of the recent round of scandals. It was because this company is losing money faster than any startup company in history. And beyond that, because, a lot of these startups, they say, well, we always lose money early because you're trying to get market share. And then once you have market share, then you start charging more. But the reality is, and the dirty little secret of Silicon Valley is that only, 7 out of 10 startups fail. And 9 out of 10 never make a profit. So Uber is on track to being one of these 7 out of 10 that's going to fail because no one can figure out how do you make money in the taxi business like this. If you think about it, Amazon, for example, they were able to undersell their competitors for many years and then start making a profit because Uber's what they brought to it competitively is they've gotten rid of retail stores. They can sell everything online. So they figured out a way to enact a lot of savings and still make profit by not having all these stores, thousands of stores across the country to sell what they sell. But when it comes to the taxi business, Uber and no one's figured out how do you get a competitive advantage that's going to allow you to make a ton of profit. They tried a lot of different things, a lot of pivots, as it's called in Silicon Valley. They tried delivering food. They tried delivering packages. They tried Uber Pool, where they get more passengers into the same car. None of it is working to significantly increase their bottom line. So the problem with Uber is they haven't figured out how to provide the service they're providing and also make a profit. They would have to double their prices approximately in order to get to just break even. And at that point, would people really use Uber as much as they are? It's anybody's guess. So that's the challenge going forward for Uber. Can they double their price and still make a profit? I'm skeptical. So that's why I'm shorting Uber.
And we're talking with Steve Hill. He's a journalist and is discussing the effect of technology and Uber and new platforms, and also really the future of the world capitalist economy, because the growth of capitalism now has been in these tech companies, Google, Facebook, yet these companies are putting a lot of people out of work and globally controlling more and more of the world economy. What do you see as the future of working people of the world if they're being pitted against each other right now using these new technologies? What about workers of the world uniting globally so that automation, technology, AI would benefit them? How do you think this should take place and can take place? Simple question.
Well, I think it can take place, but it means we have to change how we do things quite a lot. Because the problem with these new ways of working is it creates what's called a distributed workforce. These are workers located all over the world. They're not in the same physical location anymore. Even if they're Uber drivers in the same city, it's hard for them to find each other because a lot of them are part-time. They do it when, a few hours here, a few hours there. So when you look at a lot of this, what we're realizing is that we need to control the data. The data is going to be the new currency of the digital age. And so it's a matter of who controls the currency? Well, it's the Federal Reserve, or it's a country has to control its own currency. Well, data is becoming the new currency of the digital age, and yet we don't control the data. We, the people, don't control the data. Governments don't control the data. The data is all controlled by these private companies, and their only goal is to mine our personal data for their own profits. And then a lot of the data is being used to spy on us in the workplace. I mentioned Upwork earlier. Well, if you hire someone on Upwork, they give you a suite of software where you can track that worker's keystrokes, you can track their mouse movements, you can even do what's called you can do a screenshot, so periodically you can see what they're working on. Even keep in mind, this worker doesn't work exclusively for you. This worker is a contractor who's being hired by many, many different companies and people, and yet now I'm, as the person hiring them, I'm supposed to be able to take screenshots of what they're doing on their computer. It's completely invasive. It's espionage of a different sort, and we have to get a handle on this. And so we have to control the data, not only so our personal data, but so workers can find each other and start organizing online together. So that's the first thing right there. The second thing, as I mentioned, is having portable safety nets so that so that workers can be sure that they have at least a floor that they're operating beneath them of the types of benefits they can have, and so there aren't all these incentives to hire so many independent contractors to begin with. And then the third thing is that we have to start thinking about ways to create digital borders. We understand that a country should have the right to secure its own physical border, but increasingly, the threat is coming more from these multinational digital companies that can swoop into any country and raid your workers. They can hire your workers and not pay into the tax system of your country. They can sell to your consumers, and they can take those consumers' personal information and bombard them with their own ads and decide who has access to those consumers. You have companies, like Upwork, or there's a ton of these Amazon's Mechanical Turk that
they can hire workers and ignore the labor laws that you've gone through years in fashioning in your country. And so they can ignore these labor laws and treat the workers however they want. Say, if you don't like it, hey, we'll cut you off our platform. So we have to be able to, and the other thing is that we've been seeing for years is you have these multinationals, of course, who are creating tax havens all over the world, so that they might do business in your country, but they log that business in a place like some obscure country where they can pay virtual no taxes there. They do that all over the world. Countries like Ireland, as we saw in the case of Apple, where Apple paid just a pittance in taxes because they used Ireland as an offshore tax haven. And they're not paying taxes in the United States. They're not paying taxes in most countries in Europe. They pay it. They lodge themselves as a company in Ireland, and they pay. And Ireland gives them a low tax rate, so they pay hardly any taxes. So in all these different ways, these companies are using the fact that they control the data to hurt workers, to hurt our tax systems, which we use to, we need those taxes to pay for public education, transportation, the environment, all these sorts of things. And they're using their ability to control the data to basically be to evade all these laws and regulations and paying taxes, and so we have to create digital borders in a way that doesn't allow these companies to just come in and do whatever they want. I mean, I'm not a tech expert, so and some of the people I've talked to, some of the ways we might be able to do this is that every computer, the computer I'm on, the computer you're on has an IP address. That IP address has a geographic location. So there is a way to track computers and where they are geographically. I mean, the government is doing on us all the time. So we have to do it for better reasons than what the government is doing for spying, and what the corporations are doing to basically hoard our data and monetize it in a way for profit. There's a better use of this data, and that's to keep track of these companies and their commercial transactions and the way they treat workers, that would allow us to use these digital technologies in a way that actually could be good for society instead of what we're seeing now.